I'll be honest with you, I never planned on telling this story. It's one of those moments in life you carry around like a scar under your shirt, something you feel every time the weather changes. But people kept asking how a quiet kid like me ended up in the middle of one of the biggest courtroom meltdowns in state history. So here it is, the whole thing start to finish, told the only way I know how, as someone who lived every second of it. The day it happened didn't start dramatic or cinematic or anything like that. It was just another morning where the coffee tasted burnt and the sky looked tired. I remember buttoning up that cheap suit my mom bought from a thrift store, trying to pretend it fit. I remember her hands shaking as she straightened my collar and whispered, "Just breathe, baby." And I remember thinking that breathing was the one thing getting harder by the hour. When you walk into a courtroom already labeled guilty, you can feel it in the way people look at you, like they're measuring you for the cell before hearing a single word. Judge Carlton Mercer sat on that bench like he'd been carved out of arrogance. You know, the type: old money, old name, old prejudice, all of it wrapped inside that black robe he treated like a royal cape. Whenever the prosecutor, Richard Langford, opened his mouth, Mercer smiled like he was listening to Mozart. Whenever my lawyer, Sarah, spoke, he made that tight little face people make when someone interrupts their favorite TV show. And yeah, he made comments, subtle ones, the kind that aren't exactly racist if you write them down, but everybody in the room hears what they really mean. Langford pointed at me like I was a wild animal. Someone forgot to cage and kept saying things like pattern of malicious intent, digital radicalism, and threat to corporate integrity, all while showing a blurry screenshot of code on a laptop they said I stole from Halifax Dynamics. Meanwhile, I was just sitting there wondering how someone who volunteers teaching HTML to kids could become a criminal mastermind overnight. The truth was simple. Almost boring, a whistleblower from Halifax gave me files showing illegal surveillance software being sold overseas, told me to protect the truth. And before I could even figure out how to encrypt the folder, cops rammed through my door and pinned me to the floor. But that's not the part that changed everything. The part that changed everything started when Sarah stood up, voice shaking but determined, and said, "The defense calls Preston Hale." Now at that point I didn't really know who he was. I just knew he was the guy my whistleblower told me to contact if things got really bad, and trust me, they were real bad. The courtroom door opened and in walked this calm-looking black man in a navy suit. No flash, no intimidation, just someone who looked like he'd show you where the fire exits were in an office building. He walked to the stand so quietly you couldn't even hear his shoes. Judge Mercer flipped through his papers like he was searching for a coupon. "Who is this? I don't see his name in my list." "We filed last night, Your Honor." Mercer rolled his eyes, as if I have time to read every piece of paper thrown at me. You know what I mean? That tone, that old-school dismissiveness. It sat heavy in the room. Preston raised his hand, swore in, and sat like a man who was in no rush, no panic, nothing to hide. Sarah asked him to explain his connection to me, and he said calmly, "I performed a security audit for the organization David volunteers with. They were targeted by deliberate and sophisticated cyber attacks." Langford jumped up. "Objection relevance." Judge Mercer looked bored. 2 minutes, Ms. Pierce, and then we move on." Preston didn't blink. The digital footprints traced back to a shell corporation owned by Halifax Dynamics. The gallery murmured. One guy even sat up straight for the first time in hours. Langford was suddenly sweating. "This is outrageous, Your Honor. This man is giving conspiracy theories." Mercer smirked. "Strike it. Jury will disregard." Then he leaned forward, gave Preston that dismissive head tilt some men use when they want to remind you they think you're beneath them. "Mr. Hale, you expect me to believe that you, what did you say? A risk consultant hacked your way into the servers of one of the largest tech corporations in the state, all by yourself?" Preston said quietly, "I had a team." Mercer burst out laughing. Not just a chuckle. A full embarrassing belly-shaking laugh that echoed through the courtroom. People joined in like they were scared not to. "Please," Mercer wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Next you'll tell me you're an undercover CIA agent. This is too good." That laugh. I'll never forget it. Not because it was loud, but because it was aimed straight at Preston, straight at me, straight at every person that Judge thought wasn't as important as him. You could feel the cruelty in it. Langford strutted up to the witness stand, sneering like he was on a stage. "Tell us, Mr. Hale, where did you get your education?" "Some online program," Stanford Preston said, "and Harvard Law." That's when the room shifted like someone turned off the background music. Langford stumbled but tried to regain footing. "Oh, so you're another elitist activist helping your little radical friend here." Mercer tapped his gavel lazily. "I'm inclined to agree, son." Son. He called him son. That word came out dripping with condescension. But Preston just sat there, hands folded, eyes steady, like he'd been waiting for the right moment to breathe. When Mercer leaned back and said, "What are you really, Mr. Hale? An undercover Fed? Going to flash a badge at us," and then laughed again like it was the funniest joke he ever told. That was when everything changed. Because Preston stopped being polite. He lifted his head slightly and said, "Your Honor." And suddenly the whole room went still, like the air pressed down on our shoulders. Mercer blinked. "You do not interrupt me, sir." On the contrary, Preston said, "I am the only person in this room whose authority matters right now." Langford yelled, "Contempt of court, arrest him." "Silence," Preston said, not loudly but so sharply it cut the air. The bailiff stepped forward. "Stand down," Preston said. And the bailiff froze, looked at Mercer, then at Preston, and stayed right where he was. Mercer's voice cracked. "You have no authority here." Preston reached into his jacket, slow, controlled. The bailiff panicked, hand on his holster. "Stand down," Preston repeated. He pulled out a black leather ID wallet. But instead of showing it to the judge, he turned it toward the stenographer. "For the record," he said, "my name is Preston Hale." He flipped it open. The gold seal gleamed. Then he turned to the room. "And I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Everything went silent. Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "Holy hell." Two men in the back row stood up at once, jackets open just enough to show badges. "U.S. Marshals," one said. Everyone remained seated. The judge's face went white like all the blood in his body realized it shouldn't be there. You're lying," Mercer stuttered. "That is my official identification," Preston said, "and you, Judge Mercer, are the primary target of a federal corruption investigation." Langford collapsed into his chair, face gray, hands shaking. One marshal put a hand on his shoulder. Mercer tried to speak again, but Preston lifted his hand and he shut up instantly. He turned to me. His voice softened. "Mr. Reynolds, the charges against you are dismissed effective immediately. You were targeted to silence a whistleblower who was working for us." My throat closed up. My mom sobbed behind me. Sarah covered her mouth with both hands. Preston didn't stop there. He laid out the bribes, the manipulated cases, the offshore accounts, the recordings, the witnesses who were threatened, the early Gulf morning deals. Operation Hollow Crown had been investigating it all for months, and Judge Mercer watched his kingdom crumble right in front of him. When the marshals cuffed him, the sound of metal clicking shut felt like justice slamming the door behind him. He went to trial, got 25 years, no parole. Langford got stripped, humiliated, sentenced. Halifax Dynamics fell apart. Their CEO got slammed with espionage and trafficking charges. And me, I got my life back. Not instantly and not easily, but I rebuilt it piece by piece with the truth holding the foundation. Years later, I saw Judge Mercer again. He wasn't a judge anymore, not even close. He was an old man in an oversized jacket, digging through his pockets at a discount store, arguing with a cashier because he didn't have enough money for a bottle of cheap whiskey. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice trembling. "I used to be a judge." The young manager walked over and said gently, "Sir, that may have been true once, but not anymore." He took the bottle from Mercer's shaking hand and put it behind the counter. Mercer turned around and walked out slowly, shoulders caving in as if the world no longer saw him, or maybe it finally saw him clearly. And I stood there watching the man who once laughed at my life, now unable to buy a $9 bottle of whiskey. That moment didn't give me joy. It didn't give me revenge. It gave me closure. So here's what I want to ask you, because people argue about this all the time. Was that justice? Was it fair? Was it too much? Not enough. Does a man like that ever really understand the harm he caused? Or is humiliation the only thing that makes people like him feel the consequences of their actions? Tell me what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your own experiences if you've ever been judged before someone even knew your name. And if stories like this matter to you, stories where truth stretches its hand out of the dark and demands to be seen, then hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for listening to my story.